Welcome to Beyond the Numbers, the podcast where conversations about wealth go deeper. This isn't about flashy success or one-size-fits-all advice. It's about real people designing financial lives that align with who they are, what they value, and the legacies they're building. We bring together voices from business, finance, law, and leadership to talk about the moments that shape them and the strategies that sustain them. Here is your host, Chris Everett.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Numbers, where money meets meaning and purpose. So today I have a truly fascinating conversation for you. We're talking with a couple whose journey from Russia to America has given them a perspective on freedom that, frankly, most of us who were born here simply cannot fully appreciate. He's a Pushcart Prize-winning author and former Chicago Tribune journalist who spent 5 years reporting from the Russian Far East. His latest novel, The Insurrectionist, takes on some of the most controversial topics in America today. She, also an author, is now working in academia at a university level doing work as a research administrator. Together, they become passionate advocates for free speech, something they understand not as an abstract political concept, but as a lived reality that they chose when they came to this country. So what makes this conversation so relevant to Beyond the Numbers is that they've made choices throughout their life that put principle ahead of financial optimization. They've spoken up when it would have been much easier, more lucrative to stay quiet. And they've built a life around meaning and purpose, even when that path came with real cost. Let's dive in. And please help me welcome Nona and Russell Working. Nona, Russell, welcome to Beyond the Numbers.
It's great to be with you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
Oh, it's so awesome to have you here today. So I wanted to start at the beginning of your American story. You both chose to leave Russia and build your lives here in the United States. Can you take us back to that pivotal moment when you decided to leave and, include what was at stake and what were you hoping to find?
Well, I had gone to Russia to work for 5 years. And of course, I am American, but I met Nona and I was lured to the Russian Far East, where I worked at a small newspaper. And we found that we had the freedom to cover things that the Russian papers did not, because it was a little English language newspaper, a biweekly newspaper that Nona was the deputy editor of. And she managed to twist arms and get me hired as the editor there after we had met in Tacoma, Washington. So we spent a couple years there, and then those years overlapped with our freelancing, but we ended up quitting that and just freelancing full time for a lot of major newspapers around Asia, Pacific, and ones like the New York Times, the Baltimore Sun, the Boston Globe. So I was Dallas Morning News. Wherever I could sell them, I sort of self-syndicated quite often. So I'd write a story and sell it to 10 different papers. But eventually we came to a point where we just said, for our family, it was time to kind of come home. We had a son who was 14, my stepson, and he absolutely loved American football ever since I gave him one of these weird lemon-shaped balls. And we kind of felt like, I felt like it was time, if he was going to really become an American, he had to do some time at school in America and get over there. And, just for a lot of family reasons and personal reasons, it seemed like a good time to leave Russia. I loved the freelancing there, but it was also a standard of living that was honestly the closest thing I've seen to the Russian housing were places like Cabrini Green. You go in and there, it smells like urine in the hallways, and, there's some local prosecutor living in one apartment and a total drunk living next door. And it's just because all the apartments were just given away or privatized at the end of the Soviet era. And so it just, it was a strange and fascinating time, but we were ready to get away from the cold 14-hour day blackouts, just minimal heating. What happened was the governor basically stole the budget, or administrators stole the budget for buying coal that would produce the electricity. And so, things like that were happening.
Well, it makes our politicians look like, I don't know, not very corrupt.
Yeah, ours are corrupt in their own way. But yeah, there's certain things you just wouldn't get away with in America. But yeah, so I think a part of it is Nona was tired of being cold, and we were ready to look for other work. My mom desperately wanted us to look for work in Santa Barbara, California, where my parents lived, but I had been writing for some of the largest papers in the world, and I knew that I wanted to work just to have the experience of working for a very large American newspaper. And the Trib was the first one that hired me. I was in consideration at
Right. The Chicago trip, right?
Yeah, which was interesting because I had never freelanced for them when I was abroad. I wrote a lot for the Baltimore Sun, and for the Boston Globe. I'm just trying to think. San Jose Mercury News, the South China Morning News in Hong Kong. The Japan Times just devoured everything I wrote. It was really interesting.
And also, like, from what I've read about what you were doing, you weren't covering society galas. You reported on illegal gun factories in the Philippines, human trafficking of North Korean women in China, political corruption at the highest level. So what did you witness during that time that shaped your understanding of freedom, both its presence and its absence?
Maybe you should start on that, Nona, because Nona lived through the whole Soviet era, was born there. And
it was a very interesting time, especially for reporters, because when the entire evil empire is collapsing, there are all sorts of disasters. You can cover them day and night, and there is wealth, but all the stories are so dire. Desperate. People are desperate. The miners are on hunger strikes. Everything is collapsing. Infrastructure is in disarray. And, for 5 years, if you do one thing or another, of course, it's totally different from the Soviet disasters of the Soviet Union, but this is a new, interesting and very disturbing reality when everything is basically falling apart. Of course, new things are being born, like privatization, things that we haven't heard about before. But then with this comes redistribution of power, and people are fighting it. That's why we had Mafia wars when they were blowing each other up. There are bizarre things like the dog fights, and Russell was the first reporter who covered the dog fights, although theoretically they were prohibited in Russia. But this was the entertainment for the Mafia. There were so many interesting things, but eventually you just get emotionally exhausted from just having all sorts of disasters around you. And also, our son was the draft age, and we started having the police to come checking on him so that he would be drafted as soon as he reaches 18. And that was scary, and we didn't want him to get to the Russian army where he would be hazed. And
so he came to America and joined the American Marine Corps.
He got into Marine Corps, but he said, well, at least they are not beating us here. That was a big advantage, unlike in Russia.
Well, we had two policemen drop by. They do that when teenagers reach a certain age, teenage boys. And these guys came by our apartment, and Nona scolded one of the cops because his fly was open. So it's kind of a funny situation.
Yeah, it's ridiculous things like that.
We added stories on, for example, we wrote about North Korean workers in Russia. And so they serve a role sort of like illegal immigrants in America and working very cheaply. The difference is they come through an agreement with the two governments. They're brought to work sites. They're usually very high-skilled construction people. And their wages all go to their bosses, which go back to North Korea, probably with a little bit skimmed off.
So they're just a place to sleep and food, that's it?
Yeah, but what's in it for them is they're allowed to go off on their own time and offer their services for construction and houses. To do renovations. Like come in and do you want to redo your kitchen or paint the walls or whatever. And the interesting thing is they always go in twos and threes. And by the way, this was in the late 1990s. I first visited in 96 and moved there in 97, January of 97. And but when we did the story on North Koreans, there had been an assassination of a South Korean official the year before. He was stabbed to death in his actual apartment building with an ice pick, like 20 times or something. And it was it was later revealed that he was with the KCIA, the Korean CIA. So he was there basically spying, but the North Koreans were onto him and killed him. But so there was a lot of spy versus spy going on between the two Koreas as well. And you should tell about the call you got after we visited a construction site and interviewed the Russian owner about.
Yeah, we decided to write a story about them because they were in all construction sites, and we went there to interview them. And of course, they were not happy about that. So as soon as we got to the newsroom, we got a call from the North Korean consul, and he spoke pretty good Russian. He said, "Why are you guys doing it? Or why are you writing? What exactly you're writing?" And we explained, okay, this is interesting. We are reporters. And he said, okay. And about half an hour later, I got a call from the KGB officials telling me, guys, please be careful. Otherwise, we don't need any more dead bodies like that South Korean consul. And they were also asking me, why are you writing this story? What is it about? Why do you need to even write about it? So it's a phenomenon which we were trying to cover. Why not? So
it was sort of funny though. After that, a Korean came to our apartment, basically condo. It had been a privatized Russian apartment, and just built in the old Soviet style out of prefab slabs of concrete. And he came alone, and that was very unusual. It was interesting because they don't even go to the store alone. Everything they do is all in twos and threes. But he came in and he wanted to talk to us, and claimed he wanted to do construction for us. We had the feeling he was kind of feeling us out, trying to see who we were and why we wanted to do the story. But then he ended up asking us if we had any small men's pants, jeans and Nona gave him a pair of jeans from Sergei, our older son, and he was whatever his age
very
was,
short,
10 years old or something at the time, and that for the Koreans who'd gone through a decade of starvation, it fit the guy just fine. And he asked for a movie. Did we have any video cassettes that we would be willing to give him? We sorted around and we gave him a copy of Groundhog Day. Mm-hmm. So we thought, this is really funny to imagine North Koreans taking this back. I mean, it's very high value for them to be able to smuggle that back in, but just the impression of America they'll get from watching Groundhog Day was kind of interesting to think about.
So what a crazy story you're telling. It just doesn't resonate with America at all. And, well, at least not the normalized America that everyone sees on the television, right? So here's slave labor being brought in, and they have to go get a part-time job just to get anything beyond a roof over their head and some food. Yeah. So, all right. So you paint a very bleak picture. Was there anything that you miss about Russia, Nona?
I just miss my friends, my reporters who have this amazing ability to ask questions, and they have this internal courage to face the authorities. Although in our circumstances, even they couldn't do this because, the governor was basically controlling everything, all mass media. He could just kidnap reporters and torture them. So whenever they could not cover a story, they would come to us because we were writing in English, and the locals didn't really read anything in English.
So that's why you felt empowered to write some of this stuff.
And of course, Russell has an American passport, and that kind of was protection for him.
Yeah.
But
One thing that's strange too, if I could just interject briefly, but what we wrote in our local paper, they could not care less about. It was even distributed in what the building was called the White House, but it was a big modern building where the governor was located, all the offices, and they had a gift shop in the lobby. Sitting right there were copies of our paper, even a story one time in which we accused the vice governor of kidnapping and torturing 2 journalists. Nobody cared. But when I wrote for the New York Times, that's when they hit the roof. And so very interesting things would happen. Like I wrote a story in the New York Times about how the governor demanded $1 million bribe from the owner of a local fleet of shipping fleet. And so, and the guy had to flee the country, and they threatened to arrest the British honorary consul there in Vladivostok, not knowing that he was the honorary consul. They just thought he was a businessman. They hauled him in and demanded that he handed over all his shares of this company. And so he flew immediately to Moscow and had a press conference letting him know what had happened, but he had to leave the country. So we were reporting on this, and all of a sudden there was a letter in the local newspaper denouncing me personally, and it was written by some trade union official from the shipping companies, denouncing me as if I had never lived in Russia or didn't know anything about it. And he said, these stupid foreigners who think we all wear velvet pantaloons and dress like, the 15th century Russians or something. And so I just laughed it off, but I later realized that this was a very Soviet method of firing a shot over the bow, that no letter like that could appear in the Soviet times without having come from the government. So they would just put the name of somebody on this story. And so Nona called him up with the pretense of interviewing him, but kind of managed to wriggle out of him the fact that he didn't even read English and had never looked at the New York Times, but wrote this angry letter about my article in the New York Times. So, somebody just asked him to put his name to the paper. But there was stuff like that, but never did it come to any violent threat, or nobody tried to beat us up or anything like that.
So you get to the place where you want to leave and you want to come to America. So Russell, you grew up here. You knew what America was like. Nona, were you surprised when you got here by anything? Did your expectation maybe not quite measure up with the reality you found?
Yes, what started really bothering me is this encroachment of communism into America. That really horrified me. And at first it wasn't really noticeable, but now the left gone so wild, and I just see it in every actions they're taking. First of all, during Biden administration, trying to quash the freedom of speech, we were kicked out of a few platforms like Nextdoor, because we were trying to argue with people against those drag queens readings in our library for children. Yeah, so we basically it's not like a super important platform, but still there we got a letter. And all this behavior of people, to me, the communism and socialism, it is born from envy. It's when somebody is who is not so talented, so not so hardworking, just notice other people who are much more prosperous because of their talents and hard work, and say, how come I'm poor and this guy is rich? So I want his money. That's the origins of communism, starting from the Russian Revolution. Of course, the conditions were much worse back then for common people, but nothing changed. So instead of taking responsibility for their own lives, they try to get money from people who are much more successful. And to do that, they go, the length from verbal attacks, from all this denunciations, to violence. Violence is perfect example how communism, socialism works.
You kind of remind me about what's going on in New York right now. So there's one of the candidates is making many of the more wealthy folks think about leaving New York. And so that whole socialistic, Marxist, communistic mindset that wants to take, as you say, it just has never worked anywhere.
Mm-hmm. And when people tell me this is a good idea, but it was badly implemented in the Soviet Union, yeah, I'm just astonished. I mean, it never worked anywhere and ended up in millions of people dead. And why is that? Because the main idea that it is equality, we all are equal, is wrong. We are not equal. Just look at one family. Even within one family, nobody is equal. I mean, people have different talents, different abilities, different work ethics, and you can't make this a slogan like everybody's paid the same amount of money when people have different abilities and different talents. You just can't demand that, Elon Musk and some cleaning lady are paid the same amount of money. That way, you just absolutely deny the incentives for the talents to develop. So, and that's why the Soviet society was basically stagnating. People were drinking, intelligentsia and talented people could not get through and could not really prosper.
You remind me of an academia study years ago where a school system said to all the kids, here's the test, everybody just do your best. And when the grades came back, they all had C's. Even the people that were A students, their grades got knocked down to C, and the people that had D and F got knocked up to a C. And so everybody was on the same platform. Now, you know how that went, right? The children that had worked very hard and studied were like, what the heck is going on here? This isn't fair. And of course, the people that were not academically pursuing the best, that didn't study at all, got the C grade, and they were very tickled. They were very pleased. So that's really what it sounds like to me in a very simple way. It doesn't work.
This touches on what you do too, as this whole idea of communism does not understand the basic idea of wealth creation. And so the notion is that there's a pie, and if Elon Musk gets more of the pie, then somebody else gets less. There's no notion that, okay, Elon Musk has created something that never existed, like robots or Neuralink that helps, paralyzed people manipulate a robotic arm, or SpaceX, which carries 90% of the world's cargo into space. You create something new and that creates wealth. And there's just no way within communist ideology or socialist ideology to account for that. Mm-hmm. And one thing that's very disturbing when we got back, I mean, actually, this is not that long ago, a few years ago, my university was going to host someone named Xi Van Fleet, who's a survivor of the Cultural Revolution in China. And she was supposed to speak there, and the student council somehow had authority to decide who speaks on campus, and they canceled her. This was Whitworth University now in Spokane.
And what was their reason?
They just said they didn't want her. They said she'll be divisive. They said there's an economics professor on campus. If you want to talk about capitalism, he can do it, and all that. And so I wrote just a scathing editorial about this, and beat up on my old alma mater, and sent it to the local newspaper, the Spokesman Review in Spokane, Washington, which they printed. But she was brought there by Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point. She was supposed to be brought to campus. So they brought her anyway to town and had her speak in a different location. But it was just disgraceful that these students were so afraid of hearing different ideas or something bad about communism from someone as a survivor. Mm-hmm. It really hit home for us too, because one time we flew up to Magadan, which is way up on the Arctic Circle or close to it. It was a major gulag seaport back in the day. And so it was a transit port, and they were celebrating their 60th anniversary of they had been working as a gulag port since the 30s, but it was the 60th anniversary of actually, declaring it a town or incorporating. And it so happened that on the plane we flew up on was a guy named Harry Wu. He was an American citizen who was a survivor of the Cultural Revolution in China. And so he had seen many of the same things that happened. And in fact, he talked to us about the whole Chinese, they call it Laogai, but their gulag system was started with Russian advisors, with Soviet advisors. And so he had gone through the horrors of that and had lived through that for 20 years. And they invited him up there as a part of a program to discuss the excesses of Stalinism and the Gulag and all that. But even now, there are shocking things like, was it Dzerzhinsky? There's one of the worst, most notorious heads of Stalin's secret police. There's still a bust to him in town, and there's a giant monument to the victims of Stalin, but they have little sort of sub monuments. It's out on a mountaintop overlooking the town, but there's little monuments around. So okay, Christians were killed, and Jews were killed, and Muslims, and all this. Among the victims, they have communists. They have a little sub monument to the communists who were killed. They created this system, and then they got devoured by it. But the only way apparently they could get approval for this thing was to kind of act as though they too were hapless victims swept to.
They're not helpless victims. I mean, to me, people don't understand that there's elite in the communist society. There's elite that just want to be controlling absolutely everything. And these are useful idiots who bring this elite to power. And that's the elite totally fails the society, because you just can't have planned economy, especially in Russia when the country is so huge. 11 time zones. So you can't make decisions on the other side of the country from Moscow. And that's why this giant collapsed, because it just doesn't work. Only market economy. And I was taught to hate capitalism. I was taught to hate America and the capitalism. But, the thing is, very soon we realized that, this is the best. Capitalism has its problem. That's the best structure of the society, because it just gives people energy to pursue their dreams.
Yeah, without question, I'd be in total agreement with that. So I want to switch up a little bit. And Russell, you've written a book recently called The Insurrectionist. So this is your novel that satirizes what you call woke journalism and the prosecutorial overreach related to January 6th, as you put it. That's not exactly playing it safe in today's climate either. So you guys, you fight in Russia and you fight here. What compelled you to write this story, and what kind of response have you received so far?
It was... it was kind of a challenging decision to do this, but I felt really so inspired. Challenging in the sense that I kind of knew that it was going to be hard to find a publisher. I have eventually found a publisher, and a little bit ironically, it's a Russian dissident publisher. They're banned in Russia, but they are now, they're operating and in London. That's where they're based, and it's a very large publisher with a large volunteer base of editors and designers and things. But in any case, I felt like I just felt outraged by some of the excesses. I mean, like probably most Americans, I was shocked by what was happening on January 6th, and you just saw swarms of people overrunning the Capitol and things like that. But it soon became clear nobody was armed. There was it was the lamest insurrection ever if you're going to have unarmed people go in and march between the velvet ropes in the Capitol. And then there was absolutely no distinction between people who just came out and appeared on the site or even walked through the Capitol, and those who responded violently, who got into shoving matches or even punching cops or things like that. And there's a legal concept. It's the fruit of a poison tree. And this whole thing, the prosecutions were poisonous from the beginning. We had people all the way up to President Biden and Attorney General Merrick Garland lying about this. They kept saying it was a deadly protest, as if the protesters themselves had killed people. In fact, the only people who died were the, on the MAGA side. There were 4 people who were killed that day, including Ashley Babbitt, who was shot dead. It was, I've talked to people to this day who are surprised and say, "Oh, that's not true, is it? They killed some cops."
I heard that he died of a heart attack, that cop.
Yeah, there was one guy who did die of they say an unrelated, I think it was a stroke or something like that, a guy who died. He was not killed, but they played that up. They delayed releasing his autopsy. They held this national funeral for the hero who had died, and honored the cop who shot an unarmed protester. I don't know of any other protest in that whole, in that whole year of BLM and everything else, where any cop who drew a gun and shot somebody would have been, treated to a national, to elevation in his rank and all that sort of thing. And in fact, that cop who did shoot Ashley Babbitt was very reckless. I mean, the guy had left his gun in the men's toilet one time when he went into the stall and walked out, forgot his gun there. I mean, he just was thought of.
I have never heard of that.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. And my NRA magazine even had an article after that said, "Guys, here's what to do if you have to, if the nature calls and if you're carrying or whatever, but you do not ever leave a gun." And you would think a cop would know that.
I mean, that's not even what a cop would do, would they? That's not protocol.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just this idea that people who they were thrown in prison for misdemeanors and things like that. The whole thing was so overblown. And I started, in researching it, I started adding things within my plot that were based on reality. There were people who were taken aside out of the view of the cameras and beaten severely. One guy lost his sight. He had a fractured cheekbone, and a fragment of bone got into his eye, and he lost sight in his eye. I made that happen to one of my characters in the novel. Just about everything that occurs in there in the treatment of characters is things that happen, lengthy solitary confinement and long sentences for people who were not violent in any way. And so it was, just the whole thing seemed to me like the government was using this as an excuse to just gin up prosecution or persecution of all kinds of Christian groups and conservative groups, and, Latin Rite Catholics and all kinds of things.
It's so interesting because, as an American, not everybody sees that at all.
This was a big disgrace on the part of the government and the reporters, that none of that was covered honestly. I mean, Russell did
in the conservative press.
Yeah. Russell did a fantastic job of researching it. We even went to the funeral of one of the people, G6s, who committed a suicide because of that pressure. But the wonderful thing about this novel that it is a satire, and the reporter is the bad guy, and he shows all the mechanics of how his brain works, how he actually sets up people for prosecution, and he pays a big price for this because his own daughter gets involved in this and finally ends up.
But don't give it away.
Oh, no, I won't. Yeah.
It seems like so much of this stuff is just in your DNA, and you cannot help but see it, So I look at how you took your concerns about free speech and American institutions beyond just having opinions. And, you mentioned earlier, Turning Point USA. I know that you actively campaigned for Donald Trump through Turning Point USA. That's a significant commitment of time and energy, and in many circles, a social and very big professional risk. I mean, people might be shutting off this broadcast now. I get it. What drove you from observation to active participation now in American politics?
Do you want to get both in?
Yeah, and as reporters, we theoretically should be independent. Ideally. But this time, we just couldn't stay away from that. We had to do something. We had to help because, first of all, we started with printing our own posters and going to the gun stores in Wisconsin, which was very
well, as a
divided,
swing state.
Yeah. So we were going.
We live in Illinois, and so it's not.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Asking people to go register to vote because many conservatives, they don't even get registered.
A lot of gun owners are not registered, and
that's when we met Charlie Cook's organization representatives, where they were doing the same thing, and so through them we were actually knocking on the doors and trying to urge people to go vote. And
one thing is, I mean, you're right that journalists tend to, I mean, good journalists don't get involved in politics. I think a lot has changed, though, with Donald Trump. People have really felt the need to take a stand. You see things injected into stories all the time, without evidence, he claimed. And sometimes it's a claim that actually is made with evidence. But in any case, when I got a job for a different organization that did a lot of organizing of media conferences and produced publications for the PR industry, kind of teaching you to do PR better and internal communications was their mission. We were allowed to be politically involved, but I still found it just very difficult for me personally to even think of that. I didn't do very much. I posted a few times supporting Mitt Romney in the 2012 election, but I was not super enthusiastic about him. But I did. I posted on Facebook, which seemed like more of a closed circle of friends. I knew, though, that people I worked with, former Tribune people and others, were actually contributing to candidates, to Obama, for example. We never did anything like that. But when Donald Trump came around, again, I was still working there. But I guess when I left that place in 2020, it just seemed like I was much more free as a freelancer to do what I wanted to.
Yeah, it's just this job turned into activism, really. So if there are left activists and, there's 98...
Job of typical journalist.
Yeah, typical journalists turned into activists. And there are 98% of left journalists, a very tiny percent of conservative reporters. You just have to become some sort of counterbalance, and that's why we started doing it.
So I would imagine that you have friends that are also immigrants or naturalized citizens as well in your community?
I do.
So how does that conversation go with them? Are they seeing the same things you're seeing? Do you talk about how you engage in the political process? What does that look like?
The thing is, I have a few people from the Soviet Union and even Jews, but they are liberal. So, and I cannot have any normal conversations with them. I cannot have intelligently, I'm not able to intelligently discuss the political situations because they all have the Trump derangement syndrome, and you can't show them, okay, so he did this, and that, and that's good for the country. No. And I ask, why do you hate Donald Trump? Oh, I don't like his women. I don't like this. He's a racist. He's a fascist, whatnot.
Yeah, there's a lot of divide in the country for sure. That goes without saying. And I've also witnessed people on both sides just not really willing to listen. I get it. It's part of what we deal with. So look, there's some of our listeners that are wrestling with a version of this question, like, when should they stand up and speak, even if it costs them professionally or socially? When is it the right time to say something, knowing that there certainly might be consequences? You guys always make that choice. So what advice would you give to someone who's in that kind of wrestling match with themselves right now, maybe even afraid to speak up sometimes?
My advice is, first of all, talk to people, because the reason why the left live in their own bubble is just they don't go to the country. I mean, we always try to talk to people wherever we go.
But Nona, but I want to interrupt you. The same thing could be said of the right. I've seen it on both sides. Okay? And where just people will not hear each other. They can't take it in. They're so dug in either way.
But you can't, you have a left enthusiast. I don't even know. Okay, look into your soul, what he will see. He will just see the Trump derangement syndrome. That's all he'll see. Open your mind. They won't open the mind. Just try to get out of your, so listen to critics. They won't listen to critics. So I think until even when they just have this like slap in the face by, criminal, they won't see the truth. They have this kind of pathological altruism, which is directed to the wrong causes. So even if they're hurt by criminals, they will not make a conclusion, okay, I need to change my stance. I honestly don't know. I think it's just like a clinical disease or something. But that is probably not true, because, very interesting people changed their views, like Kennedy and Musk. It does happen. It's not hopeless.
One thing I would say, in terms of specifically to your question, is consider sharing the risk. That's a point Greg Gutfeld keeps making, that, it's very risky for one person to stand up, but if the more people that do so, the more the risk is shared and divided. It's another, Scott Adams, the cartoonist and kind of, pontificator, podcaster and all that, has said the same thing. I'm not saying it's always easy, and I don't even know if it's productive to get in big arguments with friends and things like that. But, what we did was pretty easy at first. We just said, I had read that Scott Pressler, the Republican activist, was really targeting registering people to vote at gun ranges and gun stores, because people there, there were large numbers, like 30% of them that weren't registered to vote, and were presumably mostly conservative and Second Amendment, people and things like that. So we made these posters, as Nona mentioned earlier, mentioning the figures of gun owners that are not registered to vote, and just went up to store after store, said, can we just post this? Do you have a bulletin board? And there'd be people say, oh, cool. Yeah, we'll just leave it by our cash register here and things like that. And it was, we only had one gun store that wouldn't do it. And we tried to say, look, if it had a QR code on it, all it does is open up to Wisconsin voter registration. It wasn't Trump propaganda, but it was a way that we could kind of step into it and say, go register and exercise your right as an American to vote. And it was at the end of that trip that we went to a very lively gun store that had all things going on. And it was really kind of fun. There were whites and blacks and Latinos and people coming in to buy guns and laughing and having a good time together. Some of them wearing MAGA hats. And in that store was a table where Turning Point was signing up people to vote. And so we thought, well, they're already busy there. We chatted with them and they said, hey, would you be willing to come up here and doorbell people? And so they had us up there. They did sort of a, seminar, I guess, like a couple hours sitting down, explaining how you'd work with people and all that. And then had us doorbelling reluctant or Republican voters who hadn't voted in maybe the last election, but had in the past.
Yeah. I think it's awesome that doorbell ringers are ringing on both sides, okay? And we must share our opinion. We must vote. We've become so lazy as a country that, I don't know, what is the percentage? You probably guys know what percentage of people vote in America that have the right to vote? What is it, 40%?
Yeah, I don't have that figure off the top of my head, but
It's not high, and that's a travesty. So I applaud you for doing that and for encouraging people to vote. So, I want to switch a little bit. Nona, you work in academia, and surely you've noticed that academia has its own culture around these issues as well. So how does your work in that environment intersect or challenge your free speech advocacy? So, like, how does that look like for you? Because I can totally see that neither one of you hold back.
No, that's the problem with my job. I have to hold back and say nothing because what I do, I estimate, assess projects done on human subjects to make sure that they don't get hurt or, they don't lose their private information electronically. So basically all protection measures for the human subjects. But when I see activism, real activism through those protocols, I am not allowed to say absolutely anything. I am only allowed to see whether this protocol is okay to, if people are protected, the subjects are protected. Because if I had said anything about it, I would have lost my job a long time ago. And I've been in this business for 11 years. So there's certain things, and it does bother me a lot, but I am not in a position to tell them this is not research. This is just for example, no, I'm not allowed even to tell you what they are about.
Well, now we're getting to the heart of what this podcast is all about. It's where money meets meaning and purpose. And I want to be direct about this. You've both made choices throughout your life that likely weren't the most financially optimal paths because speaking up has cost. Taking controversial positions has cost. Leaving comfortable situations has cost, So talk to us about how you think about the relationship between financial security and living according to your principles. Now, how do you navigate that tension?
That's a very interesting question because you have to live in peace with your soul. You have to make I did work in a local newspaper for a while, and absolutely everybody were liberal in there. And I sometimes just couldn't keep my mouth shut, especially when the politics were discussed in the newsroom. But I lost this job, and I felt like I was laid off, and I didn't fit there at all. Although my profession is a reporter, and I love being a reporter, I would be absolutely happy to go back to reporting. But local newspapers, it is absolutely not a good fit for me. So I found a different profession in which I don't have to sit and listen to this propaganda all the time. So I have to navigate.
yeah, no, I was just going to say some of the limiting factors financially too have been just making a decision to go abroad and work for a tiny biweekly Russian newspaper in English, but Russian newspaper. I mean, there's no 401k. I just give up my career path in America. Well, that ended up opening a much bigger career path. Yeah. And loads of fun and interesting. And then when I returned to the States, I sort of leapfrogged from the Tacoma News Tribune, which had a circulation when I was there of about 230,000, I think, over 200,000, up to the Trib, which had a Sunday circulation of 750 or something, and so the Chicago Tribune again. But So, it was in some senses that alone, even apart from free speech issues or anything, that was quite limiting. And 5 years, of not contribute, more than that, 6, because I was freelancing we were in Cyprus for like a year and a half after we left Russia before we came directly to the States. But, it was all worth it. And I think we'll we've had a wonderful life together, and we anticipate more fun and more adventure ahead.
And I don't think I even have to ask you, if you had to do it all over again, would you do some things differently? It seems like you guys are committed to speaking the truth as you see it,
Yeah, and I think also this freedom is a very big thing, and it's even just like freedom of career, freedom to write what we wanted. All of that we had as freelancers in Russia. So there were a couple periods where I was offered jobs. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, the big U.S. government, radio and websites offered me a job as their Moscow correspondent fairly early on in my time there, because I was writing a weekly column for the Moscow Times, an English language daily in Moscow. And, people found it funny. It was kind of a humorous column. And then later on, the New York Times offered me a job in Moscow, but it was a half-time job as sort of a, to work out of the Moscow bureau. And it just did not seem reasonable. It didn't seem like we could make a living in an expensive city like Moscow with our family then of 3. And besides, we had all the freedom in the world. We could just fly to the Philippines, as you mentioned, and write about illegal gun production. Or we went to China, and that's where I wrote about human trafficking in North Korean women who were, it's a story I could not have done except through the way I did it, which is finding through contacts in China. I found an interpreter who spoke English and was able to take me out and meet with a farmer who had bought a wife from North Korea, had paid to have her smuggled over the border. And so,
one of the things I find fascinating about the two of you is that you have such a varied life experience. When I grew up, we had to be at the dinner table and we could speak about anything, and we often disagreed. So I'm used to disagreeing. I just think that's part of life. We were able to share how we felt, and then we would just work it out and talk it through. And I think that's one of the reasons why when I look at my client base, I have clients that are very far left and very far right and everything in between, because I just think the tension of all that is interesting, So, but I want to push this a little bit, because I think that there's probably some of our listeners that might find themselves stuck. Maybe they're saying, hey, I agree with Russell and Nona, but I can't afford to speak up. I have a mortgage. I have kids. I'm thinking about my retirement. I can't risk my job or my reputation right now. I mean, you sort of touched on it earlier, Nona, but is there any more to say about how you would weigh that out and help people to figure out how to stand up for what they believe?
Fear, just fear of everything, fear of this and that. Just once you find this kind of feeling that you can overcome anything, you can just overcome. We have mortgage too, we have children too, but once you find this wonderful feeling of freedom inside your soul, you just stop being fearful. Yeah, you just don't live in that under that pressure anymore. And I just really cherish this wonderful feeling of liberation from all your because all those fears is your own creations. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Okay, some friends will stop talking to you. I mean, we lost friends over our political views. And, in Oak Park, we only have a few who still love us. They're liberals, but we still talk and interact, but we don't speak politics.
Looking back at this time that you've been here now, if you could go back to where you first arrived in America, if you could really turn back time and stand at that place in the airport where you landed, what would you tell yourself based on what you know now? Is there anything that you would caution yourself or say to yourself to change things from where you are right now?
I had such a fantastic euphoria when I stepped on American soil, and I just thought, this is the best country in the world. This was when I met Russell, and I just fell in love head over heels, like at the very first second when I saw him. And,
So did I.
And so that was just a whole new stage of my life. And I thought, okay, America has some really exceptionally unique things about it. And of course, I mean, when I stepped out of the airplanes, I had no idea I would find him. But in the newspaper, I did find him. So America has unique institutions that can withstand really bad turmoils like freedom of speech. I don't think any other country has I mean, freedom of speech is amazing, and it could be attacked. It could be, people could, try to quash it, but it wins. It wins, and Russia doesn't have freedom of speech. And I don't think any other country in the world has freedom of speech in the Constitution and the Second Amendment too. These are absolutely fantastic things that nobody else has. And that's why I think America is the best place on earth, and I love it. And when I became citizen, they asked me, will you protect America with the gun? I basically said yes, because I'm ready to, this is my.
I didn't know they asked that question when you apply for citizenship. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they asked that question, and the thing is,
yeah, something like in terms of would it serve and defend your country, or
I will defend it.
So, look, Russell and Nona, as we close, you have lived through something most Americans certainly have not. And you've chosen freedom with full knowledge of what the alternative looks like, and that's just so powerful. So for our listeners, I hope this conversation actually challenges you to think about your own relationship between financial security and living according to your deepest values. And just because you have deep values doesn't mean you have to be poor either, okay? So Russell and Nona's story reminds us that freedom just isn't free. It's not inherited. It's chosen. It's defended. And it's, often costly. So if you want to learn more about Russell's work, visit workingarchive.com, and we'll have all this in the show notes. And if this conversation resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. This is Beyond the Numbers, where money meets meaning and purpose. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Beyond the Numbers podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.